Welcome to The Start Line, the new podcast from the social impact team here at We Communications in London. I'm Alex, one of the hosts of the podcast, and in this series, we'll be interviewing people from across the worlds of industry, policy, and social impact to explore the role of businesses in building a better world. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Lord Jim Knight. Jim served as Schools Minister and then Employment Minister between 2006 and 2010, and since joining the House of Lords, he's continued to engage with these issues. He's co-chair of the Future of Work All-Party Parliamentary Group, and amongst many others, he's chair of the EACT Multi-Academy Trust and STEM Learning. I think it's probably fair to say that a few people have done more thinking about what schools, skills, and work will look like in the decades ahead, so I'm thrilled to have him on the podcast. Jim, thank you for being with us on the podcast today.
Real pleasure.
Coming down to chat to us. I wanted to start by asking, you're probably most known for your work around education and kind of thinking about the future of education and what that looks like. Can you talk a little bit more about yourself and where that passion came from?
Sure. I mean, obviously I went to school and I had kids who went to school. I was briefly a school governor, but I'd not really found it as a passion until Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister at the time, rang me up one day and asked me to be Schools Minister. So that was about 20 years ago. And so I was immersed for 3 years in being responsible for what's taught in classrooms, who's in them as teachers, how well they're paid, how the classroom's built, all those things. And I suppose what I discovered was there's something infinite about the possibility of human talent, and there is no silver bullet because it's a profoundly human endeavor. So you've got the variability of all the different children and all the different teachers and all the different communities and environments and contexts. And so what you think works in one place isn't necessarily going to work in the next. And so alongside the infinite possibility, you've got the infinite set of tools and strategies to try and make it work for every child.
And so that was kind of experiencing that, wrestling with that, trying to make schools better, basically set you on the path, open that kind of interest up and set you on the path. So you're still on lots of boards and this is about it day in, day out today?
Yeah, no, I seem ridiculously to be chairing 5 boards, a couple of which are charities, in this field, with a slight emphasis towards technology. It remains profoundly important to me. There's such profound inequity in the way that some people are really well served by our education system and some are catastrophically served by it. And getting that right is something that I will carry on trying to contribute to for as long as I can.
And on the topic of getting that right and thinking about a fair, equitable education, obviously one of the things that goes into that is what young people do after their time in school. That's not everything, but their next steps into employment. And you had the really interesting career move in your own employment of going from being a minister responsible for schools into the DWP, thinking about employment. Can you talk a bit about that shift and actually how joined up or not were they? Were there any tensions or observations that you had kind of stepping from one role into the next?
Yeah, so that is the only interrupted year in the last 20 when I wasn't focused on education. And Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister and he asked me to join his cabinet and be Employment Minister post the banking crash of 2008, and where all of the evidence said that we were going to end up with rising youth unemployment with all of the scarring effects on those individuals that long periods of time not in employment would give them. And so Gordon was very focused on, we've got to do something about that, we've got to prevent that happening. And so I came in and was immediately confronted with the reality of those that had been failed by the school system that I had spent the last 3 years evangelizing about how great it was. And so that was a harsh reality check for me. And I then had a real struggle to break down the silos between the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department for at what we now call education. It was called Children's Schools and Families at the time, and in particular around skills, because we were spending a lot of money on benefits, on work programs for benefit recipients to try and get them back into the labour market. But everything was about a job outcome. Whereas everything in Department for Education in the skills world was about a qualification outcome. And there was an assumption that the two departments probably had, was that qualifications would give you a job.
Yeah,
and that
equals the other.
Yeah, and that doesn't apply. Yeah, it can apply, but it doesn't necessarily apply. And it felt really obvious to me and to the skills minister that we should get the two departments working much more closely together, so that those that weren't in work could gain the skills to get into work, whether or not they were a qualification or whether or not they were the next level of qualification up from what the individual already had or whatever. We just couldn't do it. We were running up to a general election. Our political power was diminishing every day as we came closer to the election, and we couldn't force it through. I was able to force through something called the Future Jobs Fund, which was a scheme whereby non-profit making organisations could very easily apply for the money to pay someone who'd been unemployed for more than 6 months minimum wage to give them a job. And that scheme worked really well. And as a result of it, we did get youth unemployment to fall in time for the election. Didn't help us in the election, but we did manage to get what Gordon wanted. But that's really where I had to spend the diminishing amount of political power that I had, rather than trying to resolve the very obvious chasm between the two departments.
Did it change the way you think about education, having been on that side of the fence? Seeing that mismatch between what the good outcome was in kind of both settings?
Yes. In many ways, indirectly. In many ways, because whilst I'd always been interested in technology whilst I was in education, and so I remained interested in what technology gave us as opportunities, I started to also then become much more interested in labour market trends and what was going on in the world of work and how that fitted with what we were doing in education. My sense being that pretty much every parent wants their child to be happy, not have a mental health problem, to look at it more negatively, to get up and want to go to school every day, and to get a job at the end of it. And for most learners themselves, they want to make a meaningful contribution. And in most cases, that's work. And yet, increasingly, it felt like the labour market was moving really quickly, and is now moving super fast thanks to the impact of technology. And yet education was barely any different to how it was set up at the end of the Second World War. So, and indeed the coalition and the subsequent Tory governments were retreating back into a much more academic curriculum. I think well motivated, to be fair to Nick Gibb and Michael Gove, who drove those changes. They believed, they had a theory of change which said the poorest people in our country are denied the opportunity of university, and if we focus all of the attention of school systems on the exam results that you needed to access university, so we can maximise the number of poor kids going to university, then that will deliver more social justice, it will deliver better change. I just think that it didn't work. And that we ended up with a very narrow academic curriculum that failed to engage at least a third of young people. And as a result, we now have, in the last couple of weeks, Alan Milburn producing his interim report on his review on over 1 million of our young people aged 16 to 24 being not in employment, education or training. And that's just repugnant in terms of what that means for those individuals and what it means for us as a society.
And we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? It's hard to read the report in terms of not just the kind of stats, but the human stories that sit behind it and the wasted potential, the missed potential, and the frustration. It's incredibly powerful piece of work, and actually sounds like the challenges aren't dissimilar to some of what you were starting to grapple with in your time at the DWP as well.
Yes, and happily that they're trying to learn from the success of Future Jobs Fund with the Young Person's Guarantee. It's not got quite as much funding behind it, and so it's not, in my view, quite as good in terms of generosity. They're trying to do some of those right things, but the Milburn work and the companion piece, which is inside the minds of Young NEET, which Peter Hyman and one of his colleagues has written up as a result of talking to over 300 NEETs all around the country, that tells you a much deeper story than another DWP scheme. That tells you a really deep story of the failure of our education system, our health system, and our welfare system to work together, about how that NEET population is not a homogenous group. There's a lot of difference between those that are coming from a care background that are at huge risk of becoming NEET, those that are carers themselves, those that have neurodiversity challenges, those that have other SEND challenges, those that are young offenders, those that are graduates and still can't get a job. There's a range of different stories there. But what was almost universal in that work that Peter did was when he talked to the NEETs about school, they were all passionate in how much it had failed them. It had failed to see their difference. It had failed to see them as anything but a problem. It wasn't seeing them as an opportunity, it couldn't see what their passions were. Peter talks about sitting in a room with half a dozen people in Clacton. There's one girl, fairly monosyllabic throughout, until she let slip that she's actually quite good at Russian, at which point her teacher's turning around going, "What's going on? Well, Russian? I don't know anything about that." And he says, "Well, tell me more." And she says, "Yeah, I do Duolingo for about an hour every night. I'm actually really good at Russian." And then there's something that they can talk about. And she's suddenly talking a lot, and then on the edge of her seat, and she's engaged and she's excited. She's excited about learning, and at no point had school managed to make that happen.
Across years of education and multiple teachers who all, it goes without saying, teachers teach because they care a lot. DMs work really, really hard. It's a difficult job. So it's not to suggest that teachers necessarily would have done it, but it's a really sad environment, isn't it? How the system's working in some of those successes.
Yeah. I mean, look, I chair a multi-academy trust. We educate 25,000 young people. This week, yesterday was World Thank a Teacher Day. Tomorrow night is the TES Awards, which is a big celebration of teaching. I love teachers. I think it's a really difficult job that they do. So this is not a criticism of the profession. It's a criticism of a curriculum that's bloated, with so much content that they have to get through, with an accountability system, with a very high stakes inspection, and with tests at 16 and 18, where you just got to cram them full of stuff that they then can regurgitate in tests so they can go on to the next stage. And it's a sausage machine. And the teachers are, to mix the metaphors, they're on the hamster wheel. And it's really hard for them to then pay attention to those that most need their attention.
So you mentioned in one of your answers there, you talked about kind of the pace of change in the world of work. They're speeding up massively. And I think, I remember when we used to do conferences, I went to conferences and you were speaking, AI was always on the agenda, and it was always a sort of thing for down the track. And it's very much here now.
Yeah.
And, things are changing incredibly fast, as you said. Can you bring to life a little bit what you think that, along with some of these other big trends reshaping work, society, kind of mean, and what is the scale of them? How significant is the disruption we're looking at?
It's hard to predict, but it feels huge. I'm reading into the history of the development of AI at the moment, and essentially it's the marrying of neuroscience and computer science in trying to create machines that behave like humans, that mimic the way our brains work, that some crucial developments on the road to artificial general intelligence have been, for example, machines being able to teach themselves through observation, through getting what they want, through coming up with then innovation. That's both extraordinary and terrifying all at once, because obviously you could get to a point, we probably are at the point, where two machines could develop a language that we can't understand to talk to each other and do things completely autonomously of any human control that could ultimately be existential to the species. So, you could be really alarmist about it all. And you can also say, with ethical safeguards, the opportunity that it gives us in health, the opportunity it gives us in work, taking away a lot of boring drudgery, the opportunity it gives us to hyper-personalize education, to wrap education around individuals, around what they individually need, to assist at a different scale teachers in the human endeavor that they're doing. Those are great opportunities. So I remain excited and hopeful about it, but determined that we should regulate it and ensure that some of those ethical safeguards are in place around these extremely powerful, extremely wealthy companies. Now, what it does to the labour market, look, what we're seeing at the moment, the early signs are that it is taking a certain amount of entry-level employment. So what that then means is that there's a bit more graduate unemployment, or graduates are taking the jobs from the next rung down from what the skilled people who weren't graduates used to get. So that then means that those are getting their jobs for the next rung down, and then those at the bottom are the ones that end up being NEET by and large. And we've got to think hard about that. We've got to think in terms of corporate social responsibility and what employers are doing. And I think most employers kind of understand there's a big picture, which is if we have a long tail of welfare dependency and unemployment, then that is a cost that has to be borne by society, including by them, and that's less consumption. Those are people who can't afford to buy their products. So they would see in one part of their mind that it's in their interests to take on, or for employers like them to employ young people. But the other part of their mind goes, but my bottom line is, if I invest in capital rather than labour, if I invest in machines to do the work rather than people, then I make more profit. I can remain more competitive than my competitor. And so they're doing that. And we've got to find ways in policy, or perhaps in other ways, but my world is the policy world because I'm a parliamentarian, find ways in policy to encourage them to do the right thing.
So it's about incentives again, kind of what we were saying about education. There's a world in which it liberates people to do more of the good stuff at work and less of the stuff that's less exciting. And it has maybe a small but not massive impact on employment. And actually there's kind of redistribution of jobs rather than destruction of jobs. Or it can have a sort of hyper-capitalistic outcome where it creates the incentive to remove lots of jobs because it's cheaper.
Yes. And look, we might find that, it's probably most likely that we find that there is a timeline where we go through a period where it causes quite a lot of unemployment, and then the new work that it creates emerges thereafter. I was looking at something recently on Substack that was talking about something which I assume to be true. I don't think it was disinformation, that Starbucks developed a way that they could make coffee absolutely to the quality that they were happy with, that their humans made, entirely with machines. But when they tested it with their customers wanted baristas writing their names on cups, and that human relationship between the production of their product, their service, and the customer is important. And so whilst we might have machines that can do it and maybe do it more cheaply, we might, as humans, not want that. And so customers then might drive a behavior, which then means we still employ people because it's a bit like, when you're stuck on trying to ring a customer helpline or talking to a chatbot and you just want to talk to a person, we might get more of that, which rescues the jobs. But we might go through this sort of a difficult dip where employers are playing around with what the right balance between capital and labour is.
Which I guess has been the pattern for a lot of previous tech sort of influence disruption, hasn't it? There's been some unemployment or a spike in unemployment, and then those people have mostly found or moved into new jobs created by the changing demands rather than a permanently sort of unemployed group.
Yeah, that's right. The people talk about the printing press. That's an interesting example where it disrupted the power of those that largely the clerics who could read and write, and mostly what it initially produced, apart from some Bibles, was porn and lots of unpleasantness, and then it sort of settled in. Turkey banned the printing press for 300 years. Technologies have that impact. And then we kind of get used to how they work. This one is really significant, though, because this is about machines that know more than we do. And there's a whole branches of philosophy that define humanity as being about knowledge and about our intellect. And then we've created a rival species that know more than we do. And that's, I think, of a different quantum for us to try and get our heads around.
I was at an event recently where they talked about the attachment economy. I think that phrase been used a few times. If social media was about the attention economy, the kind of power of AI is the attachment economy, and this feeling of, personalization, something that's incredibly responsive to you and knows you, which is the power of it when it comes to like brilliant ed tech products and innovations that can allow people to have that one-to-one coaching experience. And the negative downside of that is obviously it can create these feelings of attachment in a way that's sort of very grabbing of your time, isn't it? And very hard to untangle for.
Yeah. And we're seeing the massive downsides of relationship AIs, particularly in the United States, with suicide and self-harm and so on amongst young people. So we've got to be cautious about that. And I think as users of AI, we will also mature. I think we will start to appreciate that, they're designed to give us an authoritative, credible answer, but it might not actually be the best one. And that, I've started with a lot of my use of my friend Claude.
You're a Claude man as well.
And my wife's also called Claude, so it's quite confusing. But I've started to produce a piece of work and then leave it for a couple of days so I can go back to it and go, is it as persuasively good on reflection as it was when it splurged out at the time? And I found that really helpful, that bit of distance. And that's just me finding my own habits about how to use it.
How do you use, obviously you've always been, I think, a big advocate of technology. People, I remember doing conferences years back, you were iPadded up and high tech. How are you using AI in your own life?
I don't use Google very much anymore. So I ask it a lot of questions every day. I was asking it today. I'm doing a little bit of work around extended diplomas in the creative sector and whether or not they should carry on be funding it. And so I've been interested in the assessment of those. And I was asking Claude this morning about what other qualifications apart from A-level art and GCSE art are 100% coursework. But I might also have been asking it. I ask it for recipes when I'm cooking. I've asked it about football. I ask it about all sorts of ridiculous things. But I will also say to it, look, I'm due to go on a podcast about the future of work. Let's say I didn't in this case, but And these are the questions. What kind of things should I be thinking about? I might ask that. I might say, look, I've got a 2,000 word piece that I'm going to write. This is the structure. I'll always try and think of what I want to say before I ask it to draft anything, and say, so this is the structure that I want to have, the argument that I want to make. Give me a draft with the sources that I can check and read around it, and then I'll have a back and forth, and then leave it for a couple of days and then go back and do a final edit.
And that engagement that you're describing there, that kind of back and forth, is sort of what we call digital literacy, isn't it? In one sense, it's an AI literacy. It's not unthinkingly taking what it gives you, but using it that way that draws all the stuff that and your experience and your kind of. And
I find anyway, if I go and read the sources that it's used, and there might be a source that it hasn't used that I know of. And occasionally when I'm giving the initial brief, I will say, and please refer to these sources, and here's an uploaded article that I've already written about it, so it knows what I'm thinking about already, etc. But if I go and read the sources, I might find there are things that it hasn't picked up on that I think are really interesting. But look, it saves me a lot of time. And one of the things that we will also, I think, get better at is working out where it's good to cut corners and where it's not so good to cut corners. Yeah, struggle is really important. Struggle is how we do good creative work. It's a bit like boredom. We've lost the art of being bored, yet being bored is when we reflect and become creative and think new thoughts. Struggle is in the same sort of space, that if we leave everything to the smooth digital user experience of giving us everything on a plate, we add no value, so we'll in the end project no value, and then we won't have a job. But we won't grow as people. And I'm now over 60. You've got to carry on learning. You've got to carry on developing. Otherwise, you become really unhappy.
And that point's about what are the good things to struggle with and where are the good places to struggle. And thought about it like that before, but I think that's a really nice, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because there are clearly intuitively places where the time that we spend isn't that useful. It's like shortcut, just easier.
Walking here, you go past a lot of gyms. Sebastian Saw ran the marathon in the city of London in less than 2 hours. You can travel 26 miles on a bus, on a tube, on a bike and a car much more efficiently than running. But the struggle was worth it. The struggle was awesome. And the feeling that we get of overcoming that, we can see it in our physical exercise if we do that. We can see it when we practice a musical instrument and perform and rehearse plays or whatever. We just need to apply that into other things in our lives, that same thinking of, actually, the process of practice, of rehearsal, of learning through failure, of struggle is directly related to the satisfaction we get at the end of it.
Which actually is a brilliant description of great learning and great school. So if we come back kind of full circle into education, we talked about the challenge of, writing letters of young people who are NEET, and feeling like their kind of passions aren't necessarily seen or met in education, despite the best efforts of lots of brilliant teachers. Against all those challenges and trends you've talked about, what do you think a different, better education system looks like? What are the things that we need to think about differently to kind of achieve that, especially in this world of AI?
I think it's a system that knows that when children start school at age 4 and 5, we know then what to look out for in terms of their risks of education not working for them. Because you can see their developmental challenges, what's their vocabulary like, what's their self-regulation like, how good are they socially, can they feed themselves, what's their, all of those things. And then shape their early years, their primary experience accordingly. At times you might not want to rush to teach them to read and write and add up, because you've got other more fundamental development work to do. The transition from primary to secondary. Again, we know that there are signs then that things are not going to work for them. But we need to ensure that those kids have a good framework of knowledge so that they can make sense of all the stuff that they consume, all the content they consume. And probably I would have a national curriculum that runs from 7 to 14 and stop it at 14 and get rid of GCSEs at 16. You might have some tests at 14, not many, but you might.
And diagnostic tests.
Yeah, or look, a broad test of knowledge around humanities, of one for sciences, one for maths, one for English, one for the arts, maybe 5 tests just to say, yeah, you've completed the national curriculum, very good. But then free up 14 to 19 to have much more learner agency about what you want to do. You know, again, at that point, you know who's at risk of this not working for, and really helping them, finding trusted individuals who they feel love them, that care about them, and that can help them find their passion, find their way forward through a mix of whatever is going to work for them academically, vocationally, mix the two, applied learning, and then be more relaxed about destination. It's not all about university. University is really helpful for lots and lots of young people, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And you know, according to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, if you're a male from disadvantaged background, the return on investment is only 6% at a time when the interest rate on your debt is 6.3%. So, you know, there are some challenges there that we've got to work through. And so free up 14 to 19, have a much more even-handed approach to work, to FE, to HE being the next destination. And also, I think finally on that sort of vision, I'm trying to work through also the implications of the underperformance of boys. 70% of students in medical school are female now. Over half of, 53% of university entrants are female. Boys are falling behind. I think, what's the story we're telling girls and boys about what being a man and a woman looks like? I worry that the story we're telling girls is you're going to do everything. Yeah, you're going to achieve, you're going to be a professional, you're going to earn good money, and you're going to do all the caring, and look after the home. And then we've not got much of a story for boys and men as to what we think that looks like. And the gap is being filled by the manosphere, is being filled by all those things that are fueling violence against women and girls. That and at some point in that journey of developing children and releasing them into the world, we've got to work that one out. I don't have the answer yet.
No pressure. I think there's interesting one though, isn't it? Because often the manosphere is kind of presented as the problem. And I guess what you're describing there is more like a symptom. It's filling a gap because there is a hole to be filled about a story for kind of what does healthy modern masculinity look like, rather than if you've got any influences of both area.
Yeah, 25 years in Parliament has taught me that things that we regard as being a horror show, they are a horror show. Yeah, Brexit is a good example, but it was because people felt failed by established politics, and they still do, which is why populist politics is so getting so much traction on them. It's a failing of established politics that we've allowed that gap to emerge that other people have filled.
So just briefly then, digging down on that, are there any examples, what you describe as a system that's quite far from the one we're currently at, but are there examples of pockets of good practice or people doing really things that you think start to show what that alternative system could look like? Is there anything that gives you hope or inspires you?
children and young people give me hope and inspire me every day. And I don't think we listen to them enough. We give them token amounts of voice, but really delving into what's it like to wake up in their bed, if they've got one, and live their day until they get back to that place at the end of the day. I don't think we do that well enough. There's a great school not that far from where we are here in Southwark, in Elephant and Castle, around there, called Surrey Square. They do a really good job of that. The engagement with their community, their relationship with their community, the way they are educating their young people in the primary school there is just so inspirational. I think in the EACT schools that I'm responsible for, we're doing a good job with some of those communities too. And so there is good practice around, but it's sort of despite the system rather than because of the system. And that's the bit we got to flip.
And what do you think the role for businesses and kind of others in the ecosystem is? Obviously, we talk a lot about this as being government does, schools respond, but for what do we do is with businesses that really care about these issues and want to show up and want to support the vision you sort of described. What would your message be to businesses and society?
That, for most businesses that I talk to, recruiting and retention talent is a key part of success. And the evidence is really strong that you increase the employee engagement through volunteering, through giving them a little bit of time to do social purpose-based work. I chair an organisation called STEM Learning, which does the science and computer science training, professional development for teachers in England. And we also run STEM Ambassadors, which is a scheme with, I think, 29,000 employees of science employers that volunteer to go into schools. Balfour Beatty is an example, big construction company. All of their new entrants volunteer with STEM Learning. And that's just baked into it's sort of almost compulsory volunteering, I suppose. And look, we see that across lots of great employers, that they understand that if they can get involved with corporate charities, get involved with schools, get involved with young people, they can make a difference. Their staff can feel like they make a difference. Their staff love it. It gives them a motivation to be involved with that employer. So it's good for the bottom line of the company, and it's really good for society as a whole.
Yeah, and that's a brilliant example. And actually, so much of what we see is working with companies who have a bit of volunteering actually that is the thing that staff love the most and makes them feel most connected to an organisation, and they want to do more of it or find ways to create more opportunities for it.
Yeah. I work with a company called Blackboard that have a platform to facilitate all that, and is spending some time with them this week, and with some employers at PwC, a bank based in Wolverhampton I was talking to last night. They're doing great work. They're shirt sponsors for a football team that where they put the name of the hospice on the shirt rather than their name, and then their staff volunteer and the football team volunteer to go into hospices and do a bit of volunteering, and so they found a way of squaring the circle. It's a really lovely scheme, and we see that, and we just need more of it.
And so finally, then, to wrap up, quick fire question: what are you reading, listening to, watching at the moment that you're enjoying? Everyone listening should go and check out.
I'm really enjoying reading The Infinity Machine, which is the story of the founding of DeepMind, the AI company based here in London. It's a really fascinating insight into how the technology developed. So you kind of get a little bit of understanding of the science. You get an understanding of the people behind it, because they're all of that lot. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Jeffrey Hinton, Larry Page, all the characters of big tech are there, and clearly is technology that's really impacting us. So yeah, if you're into that non-fiction stuff, that's interesting. And then look, I was given a subscription by my daughter to 6 novels that are being sent to me once a month by a bookshop in Bath. And I've just read some fantastic books lately. The Frozen River was a great one, set in Maine in the winter of 1789, about a woman who was a historic figure. She was a midwife in that community. She birthed over 1,000 children without losing a single mother. Extraordinary. And it's a great story. So that's one to look up if you just want to relax.
Brilliant. Jim, thank you so much for coming and chatting to us today.
Thank you very much. It's been great.